This is Facets of Connection, where we are transforming relationships within an evolving world. Brought to you by Relational Life Foundation and hosted by me, Sarah Melissa Oswald. This exclusive podcast series delves into the heart of human connection, exploring how we learn, love, and collaborate within a dynamic society. We'll uncover the power of respectful relationships and their essential role in the human experience. I invite you to embark on a journey with me to create a more connected, empathic world for future generations. All human interpersonal behavior involves varying degrees of both connectedness and esteem. Connectedness is about how invitational our demeanor is, while esteem is about how we handle our judgments of both ourselves and of others. Almost over an entire century of research, psychologists have proposed a number of systems for helping people be aware of their often unconscious interpersonal motives and behaviors. And the relationship grid, which we're presenting here today, developed by Terry Real, beautifully captures this work in easy to understand language with clear strategies for improving. The relationship grid contains a circle of health, which allows for flexibility depending on the situation. And we'll look at how this circle applies at home, with partners, and with our children, to how it applies in social settings and at work. Joining me today is my dear friend and colleague, Cathy Hill. Since 2019, Cathy has worked closely with Terry Real. She served as the director of training at the Relational Life Institute until 2024, and until quite recently served as a board member and as the director of research at Relational Life Foundation. Cathy is a brilliant teacher, and I'm so glad she has offered to share the following presentation with us. Her presentation includes slides, which Cathy is showing from her screen. In order to see them, you can watch the video on YouTube or Spotify, or go to our show notes and grab the PDF to follow along yourself. Thanks for being here, Cathy. I'm going to start with just one question to you, and then I'll let you speak and I'll interrupt from time to time to ask a few other questions as you go, because I know you have a lot of rich content to share. So, can you share just some background with us about this relationship grid? What is it and how did it come into being?
It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for your support in putting this together, making it possible, and helping me with the technology, which has never been my strong suit. Okay, so the 1960s. I'm a child of the 60s, and there was some interesting stuff going on in the 1960s. Remember Timothy Leary? He was famous for that phrase, turn on, tune in, and drop out. But before he did that, before he got stoned all the time, he created this very interesting thing called the circumplex. So this was in the 1960s, and this thing called the circumplex, and this is blurry on purpose. I don't want you to try to, figure it all out, but just as an example of the incredible kind of work that he was doing on interpersonal behavior. What he was doing was he was taking all the ways that human beings can interact with each other, and he was plotting them on this circle. And as he did that, he was figuring out everything is kind of a combination of two major things. So his two major things that he called them were dominance and submission, and hate and love. So you take some combination of those things, put it together, and you get all the possible human interactive behaviors that there are in the world. Now, of course, over time, that got refined. So that's like 80 years ago or so. And people have been working with this ever since. including philosophers. And there was a philosopher named David Bacon in the 1960s also, who wrote about how all human behavior is a combination of agency and communion, which are very similar concepts to what Leary had been talking about, the dominance, submission, and the hate, love. Agency, Bacon wrote about, is our agency in the world, what we believe we can do, what we can do, what we don't believe we can do or can't do, whether we lead, whether we submit. Communion is more about, so agency is more about ourselves, and communion is more about how we're relating to other people. So at the extreme end, we can relate to them with hate, and at the other extreme end, we could relate to them with love. So as people have been fooling around with this and deliberately making changes to the circumplex and the ways that we talk about how people interact, Terry Real, completely unaware of all of this important background, came up with his own version. So what he called these two major axes are self-esteem and boundaries. So there's a million ways that we can look at what these two major dimensions are. But there's a good reason to look at them the way that Terry Real does, especially if we're talking about intimate relationships, but any kind of relationships where there can be issues that are going to come up between two or even more people. You can conceptualize those problems in terms of our own self-esteem and our own boundaries with the other person's self-esteem and boundaries. So you put those things together and you get a pattern of interactions that are happening.
So tell me about healthy self-esteem. How would you define that?
Healthy self-esteem is the belief that you have inherent worth just because you're a human being. So there's been, going back to 60s, maybe 70s and 80s more so in California, was really where the movement really started to instill better self-esteem in people. So school programs, extracurricular programs, etc., were created to boost people's self-esteem with the idea that more self-esteem equals happier, healthier, more contributing people. But guess what? It didn't. There is such a thing as too much self-esteem. So there's healthy self-esteem. Healthy self-esteem is we have inherent worth, and so does everybody else. So when we're in healthy self-esteem, we have warm regard for ourselves. We have warm regard for others. We are neither better than nor less than. Part of the problem that came with the self-esteem movement was they were trying to combat external sources of self-esteem, which is good, right? We don't want our self-esteem to be based on our performance, our attributes, or what other people think of us. So the self-esteem movement wanted everybody to feel good about themselves no matter what they did. So, you get those sort of comical blurbs where everybody gets a prize, right? So there's a contest and everybody did really, really well. Or a child draws a picture and you have no idea what it is, but that's the most beautiful picture I've ever seen. And it kind of ends up not working because when people rely on that for their self-esteem, they start to think that they are better than. So this is what can happen. So healthy self-esteem is right in this middle part right here, equal regard for self and other. When children and anybody is given too much praise, told how wonderful they are, too much, they can start to focus on themselves and not on others as much. And that can move people up to the top, which is a kind of a grandiose narcissism. It also doesn't help people when they're trying to struggle with these feelings of moving down, when they're in low self-esteem. Somebody did something better than they did, and yet they're being told that they're wonderful. They're not learning how to parse out the difference between other people are going to do some things better than I am, and that doesn't have anything to do with my inherent worth as a person or their inherent worth as a person. So I want to go back if I can. Unhealthy self-esteem, externally driven.
Wait, so an example of externally driven self esteem that is performance based might be an athlete basing their self worth on winning a game, for instance?
That's a great example. Like that's what happens. That's unless we have guidance to tell us that that's not what our worth is based on, that's what often happens. So, yeah, as a kid, you might feel less worthy if you didn't win. But as an adult, you've learned it really doesn't have anything to do with your inherent worth, right?
Totally. If a child thinks their worth is based on winning a game, it becomes externally driven self esteem. What about attribute based? I'm worthy based on what I have. I feel like an example of this might be I have worth because I have a master's degree, a university degree.
Beautiful. Your worth is based on what you have. You have a university degree, and you have that because you're intelligent, right? So that's one of your attributes is your intelligence, and you can prove your intelligence with this degree. And therefore, you may have more worth than others if you're falling into that trap of external self-esteem, right? And I've used that when I've been talking with somebody who I feel like they don't know what they're talking about, and I've got a PhD in the subject. Sometimes I've gone one up with that. It's like, ugh, you don't know what you're talking about, you dumb person. And it's like, yeah. Okay, good example. So final one, other-based esteem. I have worth because you think I do.
I'm curious about the assumption that women tend to use other based self esteem more than men do. Have you seen this play out?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this will fit in as we look more at the distinction between the self-esteem axis and the boundaries axis. Women are often girls raised to feel good about themselves because of what they can do for others. And fortunately, things are shifting, but you see that more in what they would call sort of the pink collar work, where women would be in jobs where they are of service to others. Women are still the majority in the counseling field, the nursing field. Things are changing, thank heavens, but women tend to be raised to feel good about themselves because of what they can do for other people so that other people think that they're good. So one of the things we want to talk about when we're talking about self-esteem, particularly, is the distinction between feelings and behavior. A person can look like they're in high self-esteem. My mother, and I'm sure that I have those attributes at times too, was a person who could look kind of haughty. She would make fun of other people. She appeared one up. And it wasn't until I was well into my teens that I started to realize that the reason that she did that was because she had so much anxiety and she felt so crappy about herself. So our behavior doesn't always match our feelings. So when we're thinking about self-esteem, you can look like you're going one up because you actually feel one down. You're feeling low self-esteem. I feel crappy about myself, so I'm going to make myself feel better by making you feel worse. So that could be a kind of a competition thing as well. It's you've got X, Y, and Z. I don't have those things. Ah, but I have J and R. So I'm better than you. You can also feel crappy about yourself and behave as if it's somebody else's job to make you feel better. It's not your fault you feel crappy, it's somebody else's fault. You can feel crappy in a way that says, I'm going to take my ball and go home. You're just going to leave. So what you see isn't necessarily what somebody's feeling. And so when we're using the grid, we're distinguishing between behaviors and feelings. The practice of self-esteem, and here I really want to emphasize practice. If you want to be a good tennis player, I'm assuming if you want to get a serve into a particular corner of the court, that you are going to have to practice that hundreds of times. And that's not going to guarantee that you're going to get it right, even after you've practiced it hundreds of times. And especially if you want to practice getting the ball into a different corner of the court than what you've been doing for the last 5 years, that's going to really take a lot of practice because you're going to have to do something different. So you're going to need to practice that hundreds of hours before you really get that nailed. This should be a daily practice. And as a daily practice, it doesn't have to be hours of practice, but it needs to be reminding ourselves, pulling ourselves back to that position of same as. Pause, breathe. If you're one down, pull yourself up. And you can do that actually quite literally. If you take a deep breath, if you pull your shoulders back, if you lift your body up, if you drop your voice a little bit, you can actually physically help yourself move into a position, like if you're one down, you can help yourself move into a position of healthier self-esteem. It's a lot harder to move yourself down if you're one up because grandiosity feels good. People who are one up are not aware of the pain, or they're trying very hard not to be aware of the pain, or they're avoiding the pain of their own feeling down or of somebody else feeling one down. There are two ways that people land, two main ways that people land in high self-esteem. One of those, this is Terry Real's brilliance, one of those is called false empowerment. So when children, for instance, are told that everything that they do is wonderful and lovely and couldn't be better, they can kind of learn that, okay, I'm wonderful and good and better than other people. So there's that sort of false empowerment way of people learning to feel good. And then there's trying to escape from feelings of unworthiness and shame. So two very different reasons for being one up, but both of them still feel better than being one down. Low self-esteem is contempt for oneself, and that is a really crappy feeling. High self-esteem is contempt for others. That's easier to manage. Other people are stupid. I'm better than other people. I don't need to think about it. So if you're either a person who tends to go one up or you're working with somebody who tends to go one up, know that that's more challenging. And this is where Terry talks about if we're wanting to make change in ourselves or with somebody else, the importance of leverage, of really thinking about why is it to our advantage to make that change? What am I going to get that's worthwhile to me to make that change? Or what am I going to lose if I don't make that change?
Thank you for sharing your wisdom, Cathy. This is such a valuable tool to understand where both we and our partners land on the self-esteem axis and on how to navigate it. But tell me about that boundary axis. How does that play into this?
The boundary axis is about our connection with other people. So self-esteem is about how we're feeling about ourselves and others. Boundary axis is more about how we're relating with other people. In the middle of the boundary axis, we're available. We're in decent self-esteem. We're available for whoever it is that we're talking about. And if our boundaries are too porous, we start moving towards the boundaryless side. If our boundaries are too closed, we move towards the walled off side. Let's talk about these two boundaries. We have an outer protective boundary and we have an inner containing boundary. So the outer protective boundary is like the thick orange part of an orange. It keeps the toxins out. And our containing boundary is like the white membrane that holds the juice in. And that's our containing boundary. So when we're talking about boundaries, we're kind of talking about two ways of being either boundaryless or walled in. Boundaryless is when our protective boundary is too porous or when our containing boundary is too leaky. So if we have poor boundaries, if we're on the boundaryless side, it can be either or both of these things, that we're not good at keeping the toxic stuff out, or we're not good at holding our juice in. And note that our juice also has some toxins in it. So when you get to these little seeds in the middle of the orange, they're quite bitter. So if we're spilling too much of our juice, we could get to the point where we're spilling the bitter stuff. And that's on the really far end of being boundaryless.
Can you explain more about what the circle of health actually is? What's that green part in the middle of the grid?
This circle here is what we call the circle of health. So this is when we are in healthy self-esteem, same as, neither better than nor worse than, warm regard for both ourself and the other. And we're also in good, healthy boundaries. So we're connected. There's a balance of protection and containment that comes with that, but it's balanced. And one of the things that I think is really important to stress that doesn't often get talked about when we're talking about the grid is that there is room for movement here. It's not a static place. So there's the green, which is the really the go zone for relating to somebody. There's also the blue. You can move a little bit out of these things as appropriate when you're in a relationship with somebody. If your partner is being a jerk for some reason, it might be healthy for you to move a little bit more into a walled off, protected space. If you think about something like there's a fire in the building, this is a really good time for the firefighters to go one up. They do know better than you. They have the training. They're going to tell you what to do. And if you're smart, you're going to go one down and you're going to do what they tell you. Not down into shame, but down into this zone here of, I am not as knowledgeable about this person as this person is. I'm going to take their advice. Right now, I'm in teaching mode. That's a little bit one up. I'm still very much wanting to connect, so I'm trying to stay in this green zone. And you are appropriately kind of in the lower part of the healthy zone here. You're letting me lead, but also prepared to hang on to what you know and what matters to you and share, hopefully in a contained and protected way. You don't want to go so far off that you're avoiding, and you don't want to go over here boundaryless and pursue and take over the session either. So you're keeping yourself in that middle part.
Yes, that totally makes sense. Myself and the audience here can stay in a healthy place within that circle of health while we let you lead this conversation. So, what happens when we move outside of that circle of health?
When we move out, so this is where this is a quadrant. So I started by comparing this to a circumplex. It's a circle because all of these items sort of come together in a circular way. Terry talks about it as a grid, and I like that because there's this really extreme point over here. What happens when we really move outside of the circle of health and the blue zone in each of these quadrants is we can get into some really anti-relational behavior. Withholding, mean-spirited, so when we're one up, we're better than, and we're walled off. We're withholding, we're shaming, we're not giving. When we're one up and we go onto the boundaryless side, feel entitled. This is where abusive behavior tends to originate, is when people feel like they're better than and they don't have to constrain themselves. Down in this corner, when people are boundaryless but they're one down, they're feeling shame and unworthiness, they're needy. They can be kind of desperate and manipulative at times because they don't directly ask for what they need, because they don't feel worthy of it. They still want it, and they will find sometimes manipulative ways to try to get what they want. This corner over here, one down, walled off, that's kind of the depression corner. It's, I'm not worthy and I'm just going to go into my corner because I'm not going to get what I want. This is all there is. Not worth asking for anything more. So the orange areas here are the areas that we really want to watch out for. So you can take a look at how far out do you go? Because everybody goes out of the circle of health at times. You wouldn't be human if you didn't. But how far out do you go and how often do you go out of that circle of health is what you want to look at.
Cathy, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge of the relationship grid. I'm sure our listeners received valuable pockets of information to take into their relationships. I'm so grateful for your partnership and that you took the time to break all this down for our listeners. This episode was a peek into our workshop called Connection Compass, taught by Cathy Hill herself. Using the relationship grid for healthier relationships at home, work, and play. If you're curious to learn more about this and Terry Real's relationship grid, self-esteem, boundaries, and effective strategies for operating from inside that circle of health, we have the offering of the full course on our website, relationallifefoundation.org/connection-compass. You'll find the link to it in our show notes. And if you use the code Facets with a capital F, you can get 10% off the cost of the workshop. Thanks for listening to Facets of Connection and for your ongoing curiosity about healing yourself and cultivating deeper relationships while building a more connected world. Thanks for listening to this episode of Facets of Connection. This show is brought to you by Relational Life Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending the chronic epidemic of loneliness by fostering community and transforming relationships. Its mission is focused on building stronger, more connected communities through research on relational health and through accessible therapeutic services and education. If you'd like to support this work, visit relationallifefoundation.org. Your generosity helps us make relational support available and accessible to more communities. On another note, I'd love to hear from you. Whether you've taken a workshop through Relational Life Foundation, if you're working with an RLT therapist, or simply if you have a guest or a topic to recommend for a future episode of Facets of Connection. I want to know, what's resonating with you? What's shifting? Or what are you still sitting with? Send me a quick voice memo or an email to Sarah with an H at facetsofconnection.com. Your story might even be featured in a future episode. I look forward to hearing from you. Facets of Connection is created by me, Sarah Melissa Oswald. Our executive producer is Carrie Allison Maloney, and our digital producer is Kim Novak. Follow us here on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts. Thank you in advance for your support. See you soon.